Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for a curated tour number 4, dedicated to the Operation Husky war landing in Sicily on 10 July 1943. I am Dr. Georgiana Stanciu, curator at the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum, and my special guest, Dr. Brad St.Croix, is here with us to deliver this curated tour. So first of all, the Zoom etiquette. We are recording this event. You have an opportunity to ask questions in the chat room, and they will be answered at the end. Also, you do not have the opportunity to talk or start your video. Now, if I can have Brad on the screen, perhaps if he's talking to me. Curated tour number 4 is dedicated to Operation Husky, as I said, and I would like to start by making a correction to our promotional image. There were some Twitter followers who commented on our mistake. Of course, regrettably, it was a mistake, and I will tell you why it was a mistake. The image was identified in our archives as an image of landing in Sicily, and I was very happy to have an image showing the magnitude of this operation. That's why I chose it. However, I should have researched it better, because it is indeed a Normandy image. And if my support tech can share this image of General Montgomery speaking to Canadian troops in Sicily, 11 July 1943. It's an image from Library and Archives Canada. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Dr. St.Croix to go over the Operation Husky, and then I will take over and show you several of our artifacts and of course our display dedicated to this topic.
Perfect. So thanks for having me back on again, Dr. Stanciu. Always great to be involved with the RCR Museum, as I always say, my hometown of London, Ontario. So it's great to be involved. So as Dr. Stanciu just mentioned, I'll be talking about the overall campaign in Sicily, focusing on the Canadian contribution. So just give me 1 second here. So the invasion of Sicily followed the Allied victory in North Africa. For the Canadians specifically, it was the first major offensive action for the Canadian Army in the Second World War. Some Canadians had fought at Hong Kong and Dieppe before this, but most of the Canadian Army's soldiers had been in training or garrison duty for most of the war. So initially, the Canadians were not part of the plan to land in Sicily. That was a role filled by the British division. So the Canadian government, because of this lack of offensive action or lack of action period, lobbied to get Canadians involved. And the British said yes. So this is how the 1st Canadian Division became included in Operation Husky. Also involved was the 1st Canadian Armor Brigade, which played the role that would play throughout the Italy campaign, more generally of supporting Canadian units, but also other units as well, British and Indian Army more specifically. So just give me 1 second here. I'm gonna show a map of Sicily because it is quite a bit of a confusing one. There's a lot going on in the campaign. So having a map, I think, is quite crucial. So the landings at Pachino began on July 10th, just before dawn is when they started. The 1st Canadian Division landed just outside Pachino, as you can see at the bottom of the map there, in the southeast part of Sicily. So the role given to the 1st Canadian Brigade, which included the Royal Canadian Regiment, was to capture Pachino and its adjacent airfield, which they did quite easily. They only faced Italian troops at this point who gave limited resistance, and a large number of them surrendered pretty much instantly. So the 2nd Canadian Brigade landed on their left. So Canadian losses were very, very light for the landing day, 10 killed and 22 wounded. But for the enemy, it's hard to know because things were quite in disarray for them. So these are estimates. The enemy killed in the 1st Division sector are estimated to be around 1,000 killed and wounded. And all of the objectives of D-Day were taken by the end of the day. The American and British landings on the left and right, respectively, of the Canadians were also equally successful, as you can see on the map here. And previously mentioned, the 1st Canadian Armor Brigade was not part of the assault force. They came up later, but they came once the beachhead was secured, and they played an important role in Sicily and in Italy in general. So the move inland really starts on the 11th. The ground was covered quite quickly as the Canadians moved to Jaratana only after 2 days of quick advance. But at this point, the Canadians had kind of exhausted themselves a little bit. So General Montgomery gave them a rest, taking them out of the line for 2 days. The advance began on the night of the 14th, 15th of July, moving out of the peninsula in the southeast. So on the 15th, the 1st Canadian Division encounters the Germans for the first time at Grand Michele. It was a short, tough fight against German paratroopers, which Canadians would see multiple times in the Italian campaign. Were driven out after a quick little stiff fight. The advance continued and the division moved into Calmagrone on the 16th and then Piazza Armorini the next day. On the 18th, the Canadians took Valgranara. As you can see in the map here, they're quickly advancing up the island. So the fighting became more difficult as they moved up with the capture of Leoforte and Tesoro. So the 2nd Brigade took Leoforte after a very difficult fight outside the town, which was covered by a ravine, and all the bridges had been destroyed, so they had to fight their way across, and then into the town, there was street fighting. The 1st Brigade took Asoro on the 22nd of July after a very daring night attack where they advanced up behind the German artillery, or behind the German positions, and established themselves above the Germans. The Germans, as they want to do, is immediate counterattacks, which were thrown back, and the forces held against German artillery and sniper fire, forcing them, the Germans, to retreat from the hills around Asoro. So the major heavy fight, I think many would agree, for Canada and Sicily was the fighting outside of Gira. This is where they first encountered a stiff German resistance and a defensive line, so to speak, on the approaches. So on the 24th of July, the RCR, supported by tanks of the 3 Rivers Regiment of Quebec, attacked the Germans outside Niassoria, which was taken without difficulty. But beyond the village is where the fight became very difficult. The Germans had established themselves in the hills on the sides of the highways, which made it very difficult to move through. These attacks to move past the village were beaten back. Both the infantry and the tanks had to fall back and took heavy losses. So the Hasty Peas, the Prince Edward and Hastings Regiment, attacked these hills as well, but they were also thrown back. And then the next regiment got thrown in, the 48th Highlanders of Canada, attacked the next evening and suffered the exact same result, being thrown back. The 2nd Brigade had to be brought in due to the high casualties and were given the job to take it. So on the 26th, the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry eventually cleared the Germans. Again, it took casualties, but they eventually did to push the Germans out. So on the afternoon of the 28th, Gira was finally taken after all this difficult fighting in the area, particularly clearing the Germans from that high ground, as I previously mentioned. So while this is also going on, before the 2nd Brigade comes in, there's the fight for, Reglabudo happens quite often. Is very difficult as well, as you can see on the map here. These are happening almost simultaneously. So the Germans, again, as they do, fought stubbornly in a defensive position, checking the advance. By what they did in this particular case was, with their limited number of tanks, they camouflaged them into the rubble of the village and used them as pillboxes. So after all of the fighting that had happened in Gira, the 48th Highlanders attacked Reglabudo outside. You can see here as they finally took out that area. to the west of Adrianano. So the 48th Highlanders attack and the Hastings, the Hasty Peas cleared out the rear of the town. They were threatened with, the Germans were threatened finally to be surrounded in the area, and they withdrew from the town on the night of August 1st, 2nd, 1943. So during the first days of August, the 2nd Brigade cleared the terrain northwest of Adrianano, as you can see as they're moving up here, sort of in the direction of Mount Etna. But this is basically where Canada's Sicilian campaign comes to an end. As I mentioned, it's very difficult fighting. They're taking high casualties. So by the 6th of August, the Canadians are pulled out of line and are pulled back to train and refit for the invasion of mainland, which comes in September. So the British and American units continue their advance, quite made famous by the movie Patton. If those have seen that, and the whole fight between Patton and Montgomery is a good chunk about this, and everything about taking Messina as well on the Straits of Messina connected to the mainland. That finally falls on the 16th, 17th of August, ending the Sicilian campaign, and with the directions, with the attention now being focused on the Italian mainland. So Canada's Sicily campaign, it's a quick one by other standards, 38 days, but it was not an easy one. As I mentioned, the train's difficult, conditions are difficult, transportation is very difficult in this one. And they do take a fair number of casualties. So the Canadian casualties for the whole of the Sicilian campaign total 2,310, with 562 killed, 1,664 wounded, and another 84 taken prisoner. So again, far from an easy one, kind of a precursor to what's coming for them in the mainland of Italy, which becomes a slow slog of a campaign with high numbers of casualties suffered by the 1st Division, and then again, follow-up units that come later. So that's what I have for the general overall campaign in Sicily.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad. So it is now back to me, and initially I will move along the exhibits, and then I prepared a few items to be looked upon a little closer. Let me turn the camera, and you can see just ahead, it is our display featuring Operation Husky and the Italian campaign. Now, before we look at the details of these items, let me show you a little bit of the storyboards, because during the landing in Sicily, in one of the battles, as you could hear, it was an advance but not an easy one, and many casualties happened. So the Royal Canadian Regiment lost both the deputy commanding officer and the commanding officer, namely Deputy Commanding Officer Major Pope and Commanding Officer Lieutenant Colonel Crow. This picture is taken days before they were killed, 5 days between each other. The first one to lose his life was Pope, and the second one, Lieutenant Colonel Crow. And now let's go back to the display case and feature some of the artifacts related to the landing in Sicily specifically. You have here a Beretta pistol that was collected, I would say, in 1943, 12 July 1943, by Captain Sheridan Atkinson, who was part of the Royal Canadian Regiment at the time, and he did land in Sicily. On 12 July in Modica, one of the Italian captains handed him over this Beretta pistol, and just a few hours after, Captain Atkinson was wounded and sent back home. So it is quite an interesting item. And then another item in provenance of Captain Atkinson is this silk mark silk map that was given to all those in to all those who participated in Operation Husky, just in case they were captured, to know where to go and have the details of the land and try to escape themselves. And here again, it was the escape map, silk escape map, and this metal, shiny metal that could be used for Morse code and sometimes even for shaving. And let's now go to the commission certificate issued to Lieutenant Crow, of course, Ralph Cranston Crow. We also have his medals. They are actually on loan from Captain O'Leary, who is the owner. And you can see he has a quite interesting service. He's one of the very few Canadians who participated in the mutiny in India in 1937, I believe, and he has the India General Service Medal with mention in dispatches for Waziristan. Then, of course, the classic combination of campaign stars and campaign medals for the Second World War. And the memorial cross sent to his wife. Let me go back to the table where I prepared just a few items to show you more closely. And here we are. First of all, we have Captain Sheridan Atkinson's medals. You can see them here. And a very interesting item in provenance of Lieutenant Ralph Baumann. It is his prisoner of war diary. He was captured in after the landing in Sicily, and in October 1943. And if we, I'm going to just start opening the diary. There are very interesting items to be looked at after his experience. And look at this cartoon. It's actually, he has a very good sense of humor. And then we can look at it like this. And he is really looking at the details, and obviously missing canoeing on some of the Great Lakes back home. And this maple leaf dated March 4, 1944, and clearly made in Cala House at Stalag 357, Stalag 3. More images of the life in a prisoner, as a prisoner of war, life in camp. And there is also, yeah, this is quite interesting, German weekly rations. And we can only imagine that they have weekly almost 14 pounds of everything that is marked on the list. And it goes on like this until he is just briefly making mention of his bio. Of course, we could talk a lot longer and show far more artifacts and archives from this operation, but I am going to close with with maps of Italy, notes on geographical section general staff. It's a document that includes a lot of information, but mostly the information pertaining to the operation that took the Allied armies in mainland Italy, Operation Baytown. And we start here. It is probably difficult to see because it is very faded with a summary of the intelligence for the 1st Canadian Division. And finally, the secrecy of the operation, Baytown, 1st Canadian Division Operation, Order number 1. So the secrecy of Operation Husky is also a very well-known fact. It continued like that until they landed in mainland Italy, and oops, I have to change, and eventually moved north later on. But we are not going to discuss that today because our goal was to present Operation Husky and the few other engagements that happened before the end of August 1943. Thank you so much for your participation. Please continue to monitor our social media and website for more updates on upcoming curated tours. I think actually the next one is in October, but I can't remember exactly the date. And it will be featuring another interesting moment and important moment for the RCR history. The battle at Kwang Song, or Hill 355, during the Korean War in October 1952. So having said that, I would like to thank our tech support today, public programmer at the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum, Sarah Coates. You never see her because she is behind the scenes. And until next time, have a wonderful summer.